My sister stole my engagement ring. What she said, when I confronted her, shocked everyone. The silence in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. There she was, my sister, Lily, with my engagement ring sparkling on her finger. It wasn't just any ring. It was my grandmother's, a piece of my soul given to me by the love of my life, Mark. Her smile was a mask of saccharine innocence, a look she'd perfected over years of casual cruelty. My voice, when it finally broke the stillness, was a tremor, a fragile thing. "That's my ring," I said. And what she said back, with a dismissive little laugh that cut deeper than any knife, wasn't just a denial. It was a declaration of war that no one else seemed to hear. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. It had always been this way, a silent, one-sided rivalry I was an unwilling participant in. Growing up, our house was a stage, and Lily was the perpetual star, the sun around which our entire family system was forced to orbit. She was incandescent, a whirlwind of manufactured charm that drew all eyes, all praise, all forgiveness, while I was the quiet shadow in the wings, the diligent stagehand who made sure her props were in place and her lighting was perfect, existing only to make her shine brighter. Our parents, our entire family, were her willing audience, so blinded by the glare of her performative brilliance that they became incapable of seeing anything else. They called her spirited. They called me sensitive. These were the labels that defined our childhood, the roles we were assigned and expected to play without complaint. When she took my favourite doll, a worn-out velveteen rabbit I cherished, and meticulously coloured its face with a black permanent marker, giving it a grotesque smiling maw, they told me I needed to learn how to share my things more freely. They said it was a sign of my possessiveness that I was so upset over a simple toy, completely ignoring the calculated malice in her actions. She was just being creative, they'd said. When I painstakingly built a model of the solar system for the annual science fair, a project that had consumed my weekends for 2 solid months, and she accidentally knocked it from the dining room table just hours before it was due, shattering the delicate wire and papier-mâché planets into 100 pieces. They said it was just an accident. My gut-wrenching sobs, the tears of a 10-year-old whose hard work had been obliterated, were dismissed as a severe overreaction. They weren't just bystanders in these scenarios. They were active participants in my slow, systematic erasure, cowards who consistently chose the path of least resistance, which always, without fail, meant placating Lily. She was their glorious, unpredictable sun, and I was expected to be a grateful, silent planet, orbiting her, reflecting her light, and never ever daring to cast a shadow on her perfect, golden existence. I learned very early on, in the harsh, unforgiving classroom of our family life, that my feelings were inconvenient truths in a world meticulously built on the comfortable fiction of Lily's inherent goodness and my inherent oversensitivity. So I became a student of silence, a quiet archivist of slights, an astute observer of human behaviour. I learned to be emotionally grounded because the ground beneath my own 2 feet was the only stable thing I could ever rely on. The world outside might be a chaotic stage for Lily's dramas, but inside my own mind, I could be still. I became a patient genius out of sheer necessity, cataloguing every slight, every casual act of emotional vandalism, not with a burning desire for revenge, but with the quiet, unshakable resolve of a person who knows that, eventually, all accounts must be settled. The universe, I believed, had a way of balancing its books. Lily, wrapped in her thick cloak of arrogance, saw my silence as weakness, a sign of my submission. She mistook my calm for surrender, my deep introspection for a vacant emptiness she could fill with her own noise. She was the condescending fool, so utterly convinced of her own brilliance that she couldn't see the quiet, steady intelligence gathering strength right beside her, watching, learning, and waiting. She never once realized that the deep shadow she cast was the perfect, fertile ground for me to grow, unseen, unbothered, and profoundly underestimated. It was the one gift she ever gave me, and she didn't even know it. Then came Mark, and the entire landscape of my life shifted. He was my emotional anchor, a safe and solid harbour in the relentless, churning storm of my family dynamics. To say he saw me would be an understatement. He didn't just see me, he studied me. He learned the complex language of my silences. He cherished the parts of me that my family had deemed inconvenient. He saw the immense strength I had been forced to build in quiet solitude, the deep reserves of resilience I had cultivated in the face of constant, casual invalidation. With him, I didn't have to be the patient genius on high alert, or the sensitive little sister, or the quiet one in the corner. I could just be Nora. I could be flawed and tired and uncertain, and his love was a constant, unwavering presence. He listened not just to the words I spoke, but to the hesitations between them, to the things I left unsaid, and somehow he understood them all. When he proposed, it wasn't a grand, public spectacle designed for an audience. It was a quiet moment, just the two of us, under a canopy of stars. And the ring was not some flashy, impersonal diamond he'd picked from a catalogue. It was my grandmother's ring. My grandmother, the only other person in my life who had ever truly seen me for who I was, had left it specifically for me, a silent promise passed from her generation to mine, a duty my mother fulfilled with reluctant duty. It was a simple, profoundly elegant piece, a deep blue sapphire, the colour of a twilight sky, the kind of blue you could fall into, flanked by two small, brilliant cut diamonds that twinkled like the first stars of the evening. Its value wasn't in its carats, but in its history, its soul, its profound meaning. It was a tangible symbol of a love that was quiet, deep, and true, a love I had miraculously found with Mark, a love my grandmother had always wished for me. When Mark slipped it onto my finger, it felt like a key clicking into a lock I hadn't even known was there. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. It was validation in gold and gemstone. It was a promise that my past, the long, lonely story of my childhood, did not have to be the prologue to my future. The ring was a solid, tangible piece of that promise, a constant, sparkling reminder on my own hand that I was seen, I was valued, and I was worthy of a love that didn't require me to shrink, to diminish myself, or to be anything less than I was. For the first time in my life, I had something that was unequivocally, sacredly mine, something that Lily, for all her practiced charms and insidious manipulations, could not possibly claim. Or so I had foolishly thought. The joy it brought me was a pure and profound thing, a quiet, glowing warmth that seemed to emanate from my very bones, pushing back against the old, familiar shadows of my past. It was a piece of happiness I could wear on my hand, visible, undeniable, and utterly mine. The day I realized the ring was gone was a Tuesday, a day like any other, filled with the mundane tasks of ordinary life. I had spent the afternoon in the garden, my hands buried in the cool, dark earth, a therapeutic ritual that always centered me. Before I went outside, I had taken the ring off, as I always did, placing it in the small hand-painted ceramic dish on my nightstand. It was a ritual, a small act of care for this precious object that represented so much. When I came back inside hours later, my hands covered in dirt and my spirit settled, ready to slip the cool weight of it back onto my finger, the dish was empty. A cold, sharp dread, a feeling both visceral and sickeningly familiar, pierced through the calm. It was the old feeling, the childhood sensation of having something precious, something deeply personal, snatched away by a force you couldn't fight. My first thought, my only thought, was a single name, Lily. She had been over earlier that day, flitting through the house with her usual breezy, invasive entitlement, ostensibly to borrow a book she would never read and return a dress she had stretched out. I called her immediately, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in her particular brand of psychological warfare. Her voice, when she answered, dripped with a feigned, syrupy concern, a tone I knew from long experience was reserved for when she was at her most dishonest. "Oh, Nora, no. Your beautiful ring. That's awful. Are you absolutely sure you know where you left it? You've always been a bit forgetful, you know. Lost in your own little world." It was classic Lily, a textbook maneuver. express superficial sympathy while simultaneously planting a seed of doubt in my own mind, making me the unreliable narrator of my own life. She made me retrace my steps 3 times, her voice a smooth, condescending balm of supposed logic. Did you check the bathroom sink? Sometimes you take it off to wash your hands. What about the kitchen counter? When I insisted, my voice gaining a desperate edge, that I had left it in the ceramic dish on my nightstand, her tone shifted seamlessly to one of wounded offense. Are you suggesting I had something to do with it? Nora, that's a truly terrible thing to say. After all I do for you, I'm your sister. There it was, the impenetrable shield of sisterhood, a concept she used as both a weapon and a defense. How dare I, the ungrateful, paranoid younger sister, accuse her, the beloved daughter, the family jewel? The conversation ended, as it so often did, with me mumbling an apology, a reflexive habit ingrained in me since childhood to keep the peace. I hung up the phone feeling small, foolish, and deeply, utterly alone. The quiet determination and self-worth I had so carefully built with Mark began to waver, threatened by the resurgence of this old, toxic, soul-crushing dynamic. The empty dish on my nightstand seemed to mock me, a symbol of my own naivete. My subsequent conversation with my parents was even worse. It was a harrowing descent into the very heart of our family's dysfunction, a place where logic and fairness went to die, and the truth was a currency with no value. I called them, my voice still shaking from the verbal and emotional gymnastics of my exchange with Lily, desperately hoping for a sliver of parental support, a mere semblance of justice. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, focusing on the simple, inarguable facts. The ring was in its dish, Lily was the only other person in the house, and now the ring was gone. My mother's response was not a gasp of concern, but a long, weary sigh, a sound weighted with years of practiced avoidance and emotional cowardice. Nora, dear, you know how Lily is. She's flighty. She would never do something like that intentionally. Maybe she just picked it up to admire it and forgot to put it back. Have you checked her purse without asking? Sometimes you have to be a little sneaky for everyone's good. It was a suggestion meant to sound practical and helpful, but it was just another layer of defense for Lily, placing the onus on me to fix a problem she had almost certainly created. My father, ever the pragmatist, was more blunt. His words like small, hard stones. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Nora. It's a piece of jewelry, a thing. It will turn up eventually. What's more important is that you've upset your sister. You need to apologize to her for these accusations. A piece of jewelry. With those 4 words, he reduced a priceless family heirloom, a sacred symbol of my future and my grandmother's love, to a mere object, its profound emotional significance completely and utterly dismissed. They were enablers in their purest form, the background cowards who would rather sacrifice my truth on the altar of their own comfort than confront the deeply unpleasant reality of their favoured daughter's character. They amplified my isolation with their denial, building a thick, soundproof wall around me that I couldn't penetrate. To them, Lily's feelings, no matter how disingenuous, were paramount. Mine, no matter how valid, were a dramatic inconvenience. The message, delivered loud and clear through the phone lines, was the same one I'd been receiving my whole life. In the kangaroo court of our family, Lily was perpetually innocent, and I was perpetually hysterical. The sharp, fresh pain of the theft was suddenly and brutally overshadowed by the deeper, older, and more cavernous pain of their lifelong betrayal. This wasn't just about a ring anymore. This was about my place in the world, about my fundamental right to be believed, about my very existence. That night, Mark came home to find me sitting in the dark of our living room, the empty ceramic dish clutched in my hand like a useless relic. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. The palpable silence in the house, thick with my despair, told him everything. He simply sat beside me on the sofa, his presence a solid, comforting weight, my emotional anchor in a storm I thought would drown me. I told him everything, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of frustration and grief. The missing ring, the sickeningly sweet phone call with Lily, the crushing, dismissive conversation with my parents. I half expected him to be angry, to want to rush over to their house and confront them, to fight the battle for me. But he was my ally, a true helper on my path to justice, not a white knight charging in to save the damsel. He just listened, his expression hardening with each painful detail. When I was finally finished, my voice raw and spent, he didn't offer empty solutions or cheap platitudes. He offered something far more valuable, something I had been starved of my entire life: absolute, unqualified validation. "I believe you, Nora," he said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the fog of my self-doubt. 100%. We know who Lily is. We know who your parents are. This is not your fault. You are not crazy. The relief was so immense, so profound. It felt like I could finally draw a full breath again after being submerged for far too long. For so many years, I had been the sole keeper of my own reality, the only one who knew the truth, while constantly being told that what I saw and felt was wrong. To have him stand with me in my truth, to affirm my reality without a single shred of doubt, was to be given both a shield and a sword. He was the one person who saw me not as the sensitive one, or the quiet one, but as the smart, capable, emotionally grounded person I had fought so hard to become. We talked for hours that night, not just about what we had lost, but about what to do next. His anger was there, a quiet, simmering fire on my behalf, but he let me lead. He understood, with an empathy that still astounds me, that this was a battle I needed to fight on my own terms. It wasn't just for him, and it wasn't just for the ring. It was for the little girl who was told her feelings didn't matter, the girl who was made to apologize for having her things broken, the girl who learned to be silent because her voice was never heard. This was the moment everything began to change, the critical turning point in my internal landscape. The age of betrayal was ending, and the age of strategy was about to begin. The next few days were a masterclass in silence and observation. The initial frantic panic that had seized me gave way to a cold, clear, and unnerving calm. This was my territory now. I was the patient genius, and patience, I knew, was my most powerful weapon. I did not bring up the ring again with my family, not a single word. I let them believe I had accepted their version of reality, that I had been forgetful, hysterical, and had wrongly and cruelly accused my flawless sister. I answered their carefully casual phone calls with a placid, almost detached politeness. "How are you, Nora dear?" my mother would ask, her voice laced with a tense brightness. "I'm fine, Mum, just busy with work," I'd reply, my tone betraying nothing. I could hear the collective unspoken relief in their voices. They thought the storm had passed, that I had been successfully put back in my place, that the uncomfortable truth had been safely buried once more. Meanwhile, Lily was basking in her victory, a triumph she believed to be total and absolute. She would text me with a cloying, suffocating sweetness, sending me pictures of her new shoes or complaining about a minor inconvenience at work. All of it, a transparent performance of normalcy, trying to rub salt in a wound she believed was still bleeding. "Thinking of you. Hope you're feeling less stressed today. XOXO," one text read. A piece of psychological torture disguised as affection. She thought she had won. She thought she had taken a piece of my happiness, a symbol of my future, and had faced absolutely no consequences. Her bottomless arrogance was my greatest advantage. It made her predictable. It made her utterly blind to the fact that I was not defeated, but regrouping, rearming, and preparing for a war she didn't even know had been declared. I began to spend my evenings in quiet reflection, accessing the vast, detailed mental archive of Lily's behaviour I had been compiling my entire life. I used the flashback loop, a tool that had once been a source of pain, as a source of invaluable data. I remembered the time in high school when she had borrowed my final history paper from my desk, and then, miraculously, presented a remarkably similar one a day before mine was due, tearfully claiming to our parents that I must have copied her. I remembered the chillingly blank look on her face as I stood there, speechless, and the cold smirk she gave me when our parents turned their backs, making me rewrite my entire paper in a single frantic night. I remembered dozens of smaller but equally telling instances, a clear and undeniable pattern of taking, denying, and twisting the narrative until I was the villain and she was the eternally wronged victim. But this time would be different. This time, I wasn't a powerless child. This time, I was a woman with a partner who believed in me. This time, I had a strategy. My strategy began to form, not as a grand, dramatic plan for a single confrontation, but as a series of quiet, deliberate, and carefully calculated steps. I knew from a lifetime of experience that direct accusation was worse than useless. It would only cause her to retreat behind her wall of indignant denial, with my parents acting as her loyal sentinels. My family's loyalty, I had painfully accepted, was not to the truth, but to the family's established power structure, with the radiant lily at its apex. I needed something more potent than an accusation. I needed something undeniable, a piece of evidence so conclusive, so irrefutable, that even their practiced willful blindness would shatter against it. This was the beginning of my methodical search for the smoking gun, a reveal that would leave absolutely no room for interpretation, denial, or gaslighting. The first step was to play into their deeply ingrained perception of me. I let a full week go by, a week of suffocating, tense silence on the topic of the ring. Then, I called my mother, my voice full of a carefully contrived resignation. I told her that I had been thinking, and that she and Dad were probably right. I had been under a lot of stress, and I had probably just misplaced it somewhere ridiculous and would feel foolish when it turned up. I told her I felt absolutely terrible for accusing Lily, and that I had sent her a long apology text. I could almost hear the palpable wave of relief wash through the phone line. I was being the good daughter again, the compliant one who absorbed the family's dysfunction without complaint. Then came the critical move. I told her Mark was understandably very upset, but that he was already looking into having a high-quality replica made, something to tide us over until the original, in her words, turned up. I said that the insurance company needed a minutely detailed description for the claim, and I mentioned, in a very casual, offhand manner, a tiny, unique flaw in the sapphire that only a true expert would notice, a microscopic, laser-like inclusion that looked, if you held it to the light in just the right way, exactly like a tiny, six-pointed star. This, of course, was a complete and utter fabrication. The sapphire was, to my knowledge, flawless. There was no such inclusion. It was a piece of carefully crafted bait, a sophisticated lie designed for a very specific target. I knew my mother, in her desperate desire to smooth things over and restore the family's fragile peace, would relay this entire conversation to Lily, framing it as proof of my remorse. And I knew Lily, in her smug, victorious satisfaction, would not be able to resist taking a closer, more detailed look at her prize. The waiting was the hardest part. It was a true slow burn, a profound test of the very patience I had spent a lifetime unwillingly cultivating. Every day that passed without a word felt like a year, a silent stretch of time where my own self-doubt had room to creep in. Was I wrong? Was I being paranoid? Had I misjudged her? The questions echoed in the quiet moments, but I pushed them away, clinging to the cold, hard certainty in my gut. I had to trust my intimate understanding of my sister's psychology, her blinding arrogance, her insatiable need to feel superior, and her fundamental, deeply held belief that she was, and always would be, smarter than me. Mark was my rock during this agonizing period of waiting. He never once questioned my plan, not even when I told him about the elaborate lie I had fed my mother about the star-shaped flaw. He saw the cold, clear, and ruthless logic behind it. He understood that in a war against a master manipulator, you couldn't always fight fair. We became a team of two, a silent conspiracy of truth against the injustice I had faced. We would go about our days, work, errands, cooking dinner, talking about our future, but underneath it all was this humming, palpable tension, this quiet, shared anticipation. I started documenting everything with the precision of a forensic accountant. It wasn't just a diary, it was a case file. I created a secure, password-protected document on my computer, and logged the dates and times of every conversation, the exact words used, the emotional temperature of each interaction. It wasn't just about the ring anymore. It was about meticulously dismantling a lifetime of gaslighting. I was building a case, not for a court of law, but for the court of my own sanity and, eventually, for the court of my family's conscience, assuming they had one. I engaged in what I now think of as audience reflection, though my audience was only me and Mark at the time, and sometimes just the blinking cursor on the screen. Have you ever had to become a detective in your own life? Have you ever had to set a trap, not for a stranger or an enemy, but for someone who is supposed to love you, someone who shares your blood? It's a lonely, profoundly surreal experience, existing in a state of heightened crystalline awareness, while everyone else around you carries on, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding just beneath the surface. About 2 agonizingly long weeks after I had planted the bait, the first ripple appeared on the surface of the stagnant pond. It came, as I had predicted, through my mother, the family's unwitting messenger. She called me, her voice bright and almost manically cheerful, a little too cheerful to be genuine. "Nora, darling, you'll never guess. Lily and I were just having a chat on the phone about your beautiful ring." And she remembered the most amazing, unique little detail about it. My heart began to pound, a steady, heavy, triumphant drum against my ribs. I forced my own voice to remain level, calm, injecting a note of mild curiosity into it. "Oh, what did she remember? The little star?" my mother exclaimed, her voice practically bursting with a vicarious, triumphant pride, as if she herself had just solved the world's most complex puzzle. She was saying how she was admiring it that day she was at your house, before she realized it had fallen into her pocket, and she held it up to the light coming from your bedroom window and saw that tiny little star inside the sapphire. Isn't that just a wonderful, unique detail? She said it's what makes it so very special. And there it was. The fish had not just taken the bait, it had swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. Lily, in her overwhelming hubristic arrogance and her burning desire to prove that she was intimately familiar with the ring, had confidently claimed my complete fabrication as her own brilliant observation. She had walked, with her head held high, right into the carefully constructed trap. The satisfaction I felt was not a burst of giddy joy, but a cold, deep, and profoundly validating certainty. It was the dark, beautiful irony I had been counting on. Her own condescension, her own need to be the one who knew best, had become the very instrument of her impending undoing. I thanked my mother for sharing the good news, my voice a perfect mask of gentle, grateful surprise. I told her it was indeed a very special detail, and that it made me feel so much better knowing Lily remembered it so clearly, as it proved she truly had just been admiring it. The game had just escalated dramatically, and I was holding a winning hand that no one else could see. The next phase of the plan required a stage, a carefully controlled environment where the final act could play out. The quiet, behind-the-scenes manoeuvring was over. It was time to prepare for the climax. I decided on a family dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a simple, intimate dinner at my and Mark's home. It had to be on my turf, a place where I controlled the lighting, the seating, the very atmosphere. I called my parents and extended the invitation, framing it as a peace offering, a chance for us all to move past the recent unpleasantness and be a family again. They accepted with an audible, almost pathetic eagerness, utterly relieved that I was apparently willing to sweep everything under the rug once more. Then I called Lily. I used the same placating, almost subservient tone, telling her how much it meant to me that she remembered the star and the sapphire, as it proved my suspicions about her had been completely wrong and unfair. I told her I wanted to apologize to her properly, face to face, for ever doubting her. Her voice was an infuriating symphony of smug, condescending forgiveness. "Of course, Nora. Water under the bridge. I told you it was all a big misunderstanding. I'll be there." The trap was meticulously set. Now, I just had to make sure she would bring the ring, the star exhibit of my case. The day before the dinner, I sent a group text to my mum and Lily. "So excited for dinner tomorrow. P.S. I was telling my jeweler today about potentially making a replica of Grandma's ring, just in case. And he said having the original to copy from, even for a few hours, would make it 1,000 times more accurate and less expensive. It's a total long shot, but I'm just praying it turns up before then. It was a calculated risk, another carefully placed piece of psychological bait. I was giving her a compelling reason to find the ring at the last minute, and a heroic reason to wear it to the dinner, to graciously allow me, her foolish younger sister, to have it copied. I was banking on the seemingly bottomless depths of her ego and her unquenchable desire to be the hero of every story. It was a gamble on the consistency of her character, and I was confident it would pay off handsomely. The day of the dinner arrived, and our home, which was usually a sanctuary of calm and quiet peace, felt charged with a strange electric tension. Mark and I moved through the preparations for the evening with a quiet, focused synchronicity. He was my anchor, a silent, steadfast partner in the impending, carefully orchestrated drama. We didn't speak much about what was to come. We didn't need to. Every shared glance across the kitchen, every brief touch of his hand on my back was a reassurance. I am with you. We are in this together. As I meticulously set the table, choosing the plates, folding the napkins, I could feel the emotional arc of my long journey reaching its precipice. I had moved through the initial, gut-wrenching shock of betrayal, through the quiet, cold, meticulous phase of strategy, and now I was standing on the very verge of the final acts, justice and empowerment. I found myself reflecting, breaking the fourth wall in my own mind, speaking to an unseen audience of anyone who had ever been made to feel small. Have you ever had to prepare a meal, a peace offering, for the very people who have systematically and patiently dismantled your sense of self-worth over the course of your entire life? There's a profound and surreal quality to it, a dark, almost theatrical humour in choosing the right wine to pair with a revelation that you know will shatter your family's most cherished and carefully constructed facade. The humour I was feeling was born of impending justice, not of jokes. The entire experience was a lesson in emotional contrast. My outward calm, the gentle way I placed the forks, masking an inner core of cold, hard, and unyielding resolve. My internal dialogue was becoming more assertive with every passing hour, shedding the hesitant, apologetic skin of my former self. This dinner wasn't just about getting my ring back. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, about speaking in my own voice, at my own volume, after a lifetime of having it silenced. It was a performance, yes, but for the very first time in my life, it was my show, my script, and I was finally, unequivocally, in control. They arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, their timing as predictable as their behaviour. My parents entered first, radiating a forced, brittle cheerfulness, and holding a bottle of cheap wine like a peace treaty. Lily followed them in, a vision of smug, benevolent triumph. And there it was, on the fourth finger of her right hand, sparkling with arrogant brilliance under the hallway light, my grandmother's ring. She held her hand up, letting it catch the light in a casual, practiced gesture designed for maximum dramatic impact. "Look what I found," she announced, her voice a perfect symphony of feigned surprise and magnanimity. It was in the lining of the pocket of the jacket I wore to your house that day. It must have torn, and the ring fell right in when I was looking at it. "Silly me," she smiled, a wide, predatory smile that didn't come anywhere close to reaching her cold, calculating eyes. My parents gasped in perfect, exaggerated relief, a well-rehearsed chorus. "Oh, Lily, you found it," my mother cried, rushing forward to hug her, her relief at the restoration of the family fiction palpable. "I knew you would. I told you, Nora. It was all just a big misunderstanding." They both looked at me then, their expressions hopeful and expectant, waiting for me to join in this chorus of praise, to gush with gratitude and thank my wonderful sister for returning the very thing she had stolen from me. The enablers were playing their parts to perfection, effortlessly reinforcing the narrative of Lily, the unwitting hero, and me, the forgetful, hysterical, and deeply unfair accuser. I looked at the ring on her finger, then at her smug, self-satisfied face, then at my parents' beaming, foolish smiles, and I felt nothing but a profound, icy, and liberating calm. The in medias res confessional that had started this whole internal narrative was about to come full circle. The hook was in place, the players were on stage, and the moment I had been meticulously planning for weeks was finally, gloriously, here. I let the scene of their joyful reunion play out for a few excruciating moments, observing the family dynamics with the detached, analytical clarity of a scientist studying insects under glass. My mother fussed over Lily, praising her honesty and her good heart. My father clapped her on the shoulder, calling her his good girl, his voice thick with pride. Lily, a masterful actress, lapped it all up, her eyes flicking over to me every few seconds to gauge my reaction, to savor what she believed was her ultimate victory over me. The dialogue was a perfect, textbook example of emotional contrast in action. Theirs was loud, effusive, self-congratulatory, and built on a foundation of lies. Mine, when it came, would be quiet, precise, and devastatingly true. I waited for a lull in their saccharine performance, a small breath between the lines of their shared, comfortable script. Then, I turned my full attention to my sister. I did not raise my voice. I did not betray any anger. I looked directly into her eyes, my own expression, a placid, unreadable mask. "Thank you for finding it, Lily," I said, my voice perfectly even and calm. "I'm so incredibly relieved. Before you take it off, though, can I just see it one more time, on your hand?" She held her hand out proudly, the deep blue sapphire gleaming under the warm light of the living room lamp. "Of course," she said, her tone dripping with condescending graciousness. I almost forgot how absolutely beautiful it was. I took her hand in mine, my touch surprisingly steady, my nerves completely gone, replaced by a strange, humming energy. I angled her hand under the light, just so, as if I were a jeweler examining a rare find. The entire room fell silent, the three of them watching this strange, quiet, and intense interaction. The air was thick with unspoken words, with decades of resentment, jealousy, and deceit. It was the moment of escalation, the tipping point just before the climax. The delicate balance of power in the room had begun to shift, subtly but irrevocably, and only I knew it. The background cowards, my parents, watched with faint, bovine confusion, still completely unaware that the heartwarming family play they were enjoying was about to end in a shocking tragedy for its leading lady. This was the moment of the righteous turnaround, the pivotal scene I had replayed in my mind 1,000 times, refining every detail. I held her hand, my gaze fixed intently on the ring, the object at the center of this storm. "It's funny," I began, my voice remaining conversational, almost light, a stark and deliberate contrast to the crushing gravity of the situation. "The other day, when Mom called and told me that you remembered seeing the little six-pointed star inside the sapphire, it really got me thinking." Lily's practiced smile tightened just a fraction at the corners of her mouth, the first sign of a crack in her flawless facade, but she held her ground, a testament to her years of experience. "Yes," she said, her voice confident. "It's so unique. I remember it clearly. You can see it right there if you get the angle right." She pointed with the index finger of her other hand, indicating a random spot on the stone's polished surface. My parents nodded along eagerly, their faces studies in clueless affirmation. "That's the thing, though," I continued, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, forcing them to lean in and listen more closely. "I was talking to the jeweler again yesterday. He's an old family friend of Grandma's, an expert on her entire collection. He was the one who appraised the ring for the insurance claim. He has all the original paperwork from when it was first purchased in the 1950s, the GIA certificates, everything." I paused, letting the weight of my words, the mention of official documents and experts, settle into the tense silence of the room. I finally looked up from the ring and met Lily's eyes. Her confidence was beginning to visibly waver now, a flicker of genuine uncertainty, of animal fear, in their depths. The condescending fool was starting to realize, far too late, that she had confidently walked into a trap she couldn't see, a cage whose bars were forged from her own lies. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Nora, what are you getting at?" she asked, her voice tinged with that familiar, sharp annoyance that always surfaced whenever I refused to follow the established family script. I ignored her completely. My focus, my entire being, was directed at Lily. This was between the patient genius and the condescending fool. The final act was for her, and her alone. I finally dropped her hand as if it were contaminated and took a single, deliberate step back, creating a small, invisible stage in the middle of our living room. My own long, painful emotional arc was finally reaching its peak. From the depths of betrayal and pain to the cold, clear heights of focused, steely determination. I was ready for the empowerment that comes only with speaking the unvarnished, unadulterated truth. According to the jeweler, and according to the official GIA appraisal documents that he faxed over to me this morning, I stated, my voice now cold and clear as glass, completely devoid of the hesitation and apology that had marked my speech for my entire life, the sapphire in Grandma's ring is a completely, certifiably flawless stone. Internally, externally, it is perfect. There is no inclusion, there is no flaw, there is no star, there never was. The silence that followed this declaration was absolute. It was a stunned, deafening, physical void. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. My parents stared at me, their faces a slow-motion capture of confusion transforming into dawning, sickening horror. They were the silent witnesses, the lifelong enablers, finally and brutally forced to confront the ugly lie they had so comfortably inhabited for decades. But my eyes were locked on Lily. Her face had gone chalky white, all the colour draining away, leaving behind a ghastly mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The smugness, the arrogance, the condescending pity, the effortless superiority, it all dissolved in an instant, replaced by the raw, desperate, cornered look of someone who has been comprehensively and irrevocably caught. This was the smoking gun reveal. It wasn't a grainy photo or a he-said-she-said argument. It was her own words, her own lie, now hanging in the air like a toxic gas, undeniable and lethally self-incriminating. Her desperate desire to be clever, to prove that she knew the ring intimately, had become the very evidence that condemned her. The dark, poetic irony of it was exquisite. And then came the line, the question that would echo in the haunted halls of our family's history forever. The one I started this entire story with, the one that had been burning a hole in my mind for weeks. I looked at my sister, my creation, whose world was visibly, catastrophically crumbling around her, and I asked the question that sealed her fate, my voice cutting through the thick, suffocating silence like a razor. "So, Lily," I said, my tone clinical, detached, like a scientist posing a final, unanswerable question to a failed experiment. "How did you see a star that doesn't exist?" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air on a dry dock. Her mind, always so quick to lie, to deflect, to manipulate, was completely, utterly blank. She looked frantically to my mother, then to my father, her eyes wide and pleading for a rescue, for them to perform their usual sacred role and smooth it all over, to rewrite the scene. But for the first time in their lives, they were silent. They were staring at her, at the ring on her hand, their own faces finally reflecting the horrifying, unvarnished truth. They were the background cowards, suddenly thrust into the harsh, unforgiving spotlight, and they didn't know their lines. Lily, cornered, exposed, and desperate, finally found her voice. And what she said shocked everyone, even me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession of guilt. It was a scream, a primal scream of pure, entitled, venomous rage. "You always had to have something that was just yours," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly, a sound I had never heard from her before. "You always had to be so special, so quiet, so different, you and your books, and your sad little face. I deserved something beautiful. I deserved it more than you." It was a confession, wrapped in a furious accusation, a breathtaking display of her deeply warped reality. The raw, unfiltered jealousy, the years of simmering resentment she felt toward the very sister she had systematically victimized, all came pouring out in a torrent of poison. She wasn't sorry for stealing. She was incandescent with rage that she'd been caught. The immediate aftermath of her horrifying outburst was a wasteland of stunned, ringing silence. Her ugly, desperate words hung in the air. A poison that had finally been released from its containment, contaminating everything. My parents looked utterly devastated, not, I realized, by what Lily had done, but by what she had revealed about the dark, twisted core of herself. The perfect, spirited, golden daughter they had manufactured in their minds over 30 years had been shattered in an instant, replaced by the bitter, jealous, hateful stranger standing before them, her face contorted in a mask of rage. The condescending fool had completed her spectacular downfall, brought about entirely by her own overconfidence and her insatiable, manipulative nature. Mark, my silent, steady, wonderful anchor, moved to my side, placing a warm, solid hand on the small of my back. His presence was a quiet, powerful statement. Her story is over, and ours continues. I looked at Lily, whose face was now streaked with angry, mascara-stained tears, and I felt a strange, almost serene sense of detachment. The white-hot pain and the deep, aching betrayal that had consumed me for weeks were gone, completely replaced by a kind of peaceful, liberating emptiness. It was a delayed catharsis, a quiet, emotional release. The emotional payoff wasn't the screaming match I might have once fantasized about. It was this quiet, undeniable, and permanent moment of truth. I had won, not by being louder or crueler, but by being smarter. I had turned the tables on a master manipulator, using nothing but my intellect, my patience, and my calm resolve. "Take it off, Lily," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion at all. It was not a request. It was a quiet, firm command. Her hands trembled violently as she fumbled with the ring. The beautiful object she had coveted, the symbol of a love and a history she could never truly understand, now seemed to burn her skin. She finally wrenched it off her finger and thrust it at me, her eyes cast down, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't take it from her. I just looked at her empty, outstretched, trembling hand. Mark stepped forward then, his movement calm, graceful, and deliberate. He took the ring from Lily's trembling hand without a single word, his expression one of quiet, profound contempt that was more damning than any shout could ever be. He then turned to me, and, there in the smouldering ruins of my family's making, he gently slid the ring back onto my finger, where it belonged. It felt different this time, as it settled into place. It wasn't just a symbol of his love for me, or a connection to my grandmother's memory. It was a symbol of my own strength, of my hard-won victory. It was a circle of resilience that I had forged myself in the fires of their dysfunction. The justice of it all was beautifully, achingly poetic. Lily, who had wanted to possess something beautiful to make herself feel superior, was now exposed as something irredeemably ugly on the inside. My parents, who had always demanded that I be the quiet one, the one who smoothed things over, were now rendered utterly speechless by the brutal truth. They finally saw the toxic dynamic they had not just allowed, but had actively fostered for decades. The patient genius they had so foolishly underestimated, and the condescending fool they had so lovingly created. I looked at my family, these 3 people who were supposed to be my closest allies in the world, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. They were strangers. The enablers and the antagonist, their roles in the long, sad play of my life had been played out. There was nothing left to say. The confrontation had brought not reconciliation, but a final, clean, and necessary severance. The resolution was not about forgiveness. It was about my transformation. My transformation into a woman who no longer needed their approval, who could stand firmly in her own truth, unshakable, unbreakable, and finally, blessedly whole. Mark and I didn't stay for the rest of the dinner we had so carefully prepared. There was no closure to be had there, no healing to be found in the emotional wreckage. The peaceful ending I craved, the one I deserved, was not in that house. With a final, quiet look at the 3 of them, frozen in their tragic tableau of disgrace and disillusionment, I turned and walked toward the door. Mark was right beside me, his hand in mine. This was a symbolic action, a physical manifestation of the long, arduous emotional journey I had just completed. I was locking the door on a part of my life that had only ever caused me pain and made me doubt my own sanity. As we stepped out into the cool, cleansing night air, it felt like I was taking my first true breath of clean air after a lifetime spent in a smoke-filled, suffocating room. The sense of empowerment was not a loud, triumphant roar, but a deep, abiding, and profound peace. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through the simple, powerful, and elegant act of revealing the truth. The clever vindication came from the quiet, satisfying knowledge that Lily's own actions, her own character flaws, were the sole architects of her undoing. Her punishment wasn't anything I could ever impose. It was the crushing reality of who she was, now laid bare for all, especially herself, to see. The schadenfreude was not in her pain, but in the final, beautiful restoration of order, in the universe finally, at long last, righting a small, intensely personal wrong. The community I now addressed, the one that mattered, was the one I was building with Mark, a community of two, founded on the bedrock of trust, mutual respect, and unwavering belief in each other. In the weeks that followed, my life became quieter, calmer, and infinitely more peaceful. My parents called, of course. Their calls were filled with desperate, clumsy, self-serving apologies, with pathetic pleas to fix things, to return to the way things were, to pretend the final scene had never happened. But they still didn't understand, and perhaps they never would. They were apologizing for the incident, for the unfortunate discovery, not for the lifetime of behavior that had led to it. They wanted to mend the facade, to glue the broken pieces of their perfect family portrait back together, but I was no longer interested in living in a broken house. I kept my distance, not out of spite or anger, but out of a newfound and fiercely protective sense of self-preservation. My relationship with them may one day be repaired, but it will be on entirely new terms, on a foundation of truth and accountability that they, not I, must build. As for Lily, I have not heard a single word from her directly. The last I heard, through a gossiping cousin, was that she was telling people I had masterminded the entire thing to set her up, that I had always been jealous of her, and that I had finally snapped. It was a final, pathetic attempt to cling to her lifelong victim status, but the words had no power anymore. They couldn't hurt me. They were just sad, empty noises from a faraway room. The story I had lived was now my own to tell, and I had told it, at least to myself. My point of view was now the only one that mattered in the narrative of my life. The story was no longer one of betrayal, but one of hard-won empowerment. My life with Mark is filled with the kind of simple, accessible, emotionally rich honesty we all deserve. We are building a future where truth is the default setting, not a shocking revelation. The ring on my finger is a constant, sparkling reminder, not of the theft, but of the retrieval. The retrieval of a beautiful, meaningful object, yes, but more importantly, the retrieval of myself. And that is a story worth telling.